Snoop Dogg wasn't just watching hip-hop's wildest era unfold, he was allegedly in the middle of it. And the proof? It might be hiding in one pager message that was never meant to see daylight. In 2022, singer-turned-whistleblower Jaguar Wright, who's been calling out industry secrets like she's got nothing left to lose, dropped a claim that reignited one of hip-hop's oldest fires. According to her, Snoop knew exactly what was coming for Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace, better known as Biggie Smalls, long before those tragic bullets flew. She didn't stutter, she didn't hesitate. Her exact words were, "Everyone knew Diddy was the devil. He's been the devil for 30 years. And she didn't just stop at throwing names around, she pointed straight at the connections everyone ignored. Wright hinted that behind every so-called rap beef, there was a puppet master pulling strings. And behind that puppet master, someone fans trusted. Someone she claimed was Snoop himself. Now yeah, it sounds like another wild conspiracy at first, but that's where things start getting eerie. Because when you line it up with real-life moments, it starts to make sense. The dots connect. Backstage tension, hidden messages, and that one pager that somehow slipped through the cracks. And when we rewind to 1996, Snoop's words on an LA radio station days before Shakur's fatal Vegas drive-by hit different. He was out there publicly showing love to Bad Boy Records, the same crew Pac had declared war on. That wasn't just bad timing, it looked like betrayal. Snoop wasn't just a label mate, not just a collaborator. He called Pac his brother. But that interview, it didn't sound like brotherhood. It sounded like the opposite. And guess what? Even Napoleon, a member of Shakur's own crew, noticed something wasn't right. The Outlaws didn't bite their tongues either. One of them flat out accused Snoop of being jealous of Tupac's rise, claiming he only started rewriting history after Pac was gone. In his words, Snoop tried to dim his light, and just when people thought the drama was buried in the past, early 2025 flipped everything upside down. Suge Knight, fresh from behind bars and running his own podcast, jumped on the mic, and he didn't hold back. He said straight up, Snoop's got a lot of explaining to do when it comes to what really happened to Shakur. So now the question is, what exactly does Snoop need to explain? Because the details floating around are wild. According to the All Eyes on Me biopic and people who lived through that era, the timeline paints a shady picture. Right after that controversial radio interview, Snoop hopped on a private jet with Shakur and Suge Knight. But it wasn't brotherly vibes, it was cold tension in the air, silence so heavy it felt dangerous. And here's the shocking part. Snoop himself admitted he was so uneasy he carried a blade tucked up his sleeve. Let's get one thing straight. This wasn't just a little label drama or crew tension. This was the boiling point of a coast-to-coast war. Money, fame, and lives were at stake. And if you need a weapon to sit beside your so-called brother, that means something's off. Either that friendship wasn't real, or Snoop knew something the rest of the world didn't. Then came that chilling hospital scene in Vegas. When Tupac was fighting for his life, Snoop rushed to the hospital to see Tupac. And what happened next isn't just rumor, it's real-life chaos. The moment he saw Pac lying there, covered in tubes, fighting for his life, Snoop fainted. Right there in the hospital, Afeni Shakur, Pac's mother, stood strong beside her son, and she didn't sugarcoat a thing. She told Snoop straight up to pull himself together, fix his face, and say goodbye to her son like a man. He did what she said. But here's where the cracks start to show. If this was just grief, then why did Suge Knight later hint that Snoop already knew what was coming? Why did Jaguar Wright claim he was reading a pager before anyone else even knew what happened? And why would a man supposedly heartbroken over his friend's fate need to bring a blade on that plane in the first place? Something's not adding up. That pager message, still unverified but whispered about in every corner of the hip-hop world, has become the smoking gun in a growing theory. The claim? Snoop wasn't just a witness, he was the middleman. That he'd already made moves to align himself with Diddy, quietly stepping away from the sinking ship that was Death Row and moving toward Bad Boy's powerful orbit. And when you trace the timeline, it all fits. Right after Pac's funeral, Snoop went silent about the East Coast beef. He flipped his image, started popping up in safer, cleaner circles, away from Suge, closer to the corporate world. Some say it was survival, others say it was betrayal. But here's the real twist. Jaguar Wright swears this connection between Snoop and Diddy didn't start recently. She claims it's been decades in the making, that Snoop's always been Diddy's quiet ally, the cool face behind the dirtiest moves in hip-hop. And if that's true, if Snoop's loyalty really belonged to Diddy from the start, then everything he ever did at Death Row suddenly looks different. Every handshake, every verse, every loyal move might have had another motive behind it. And the timing couldn't be more suspicious, especially now that Diddy's caught up in one of the biggest legal storms hip-hop's ever seen. Racketeering, trafficking, and those wild accusations about crossing state lines for secret encounters. What's crazy is how many familiar patterns keep popping up. Some of the same names, same faces, even the same habits people once whispered about Snoop. Now, let's be clear. Snoop hasn't been hit with any formal charges tied to Diddy's federal mess, but insiders have been talking. They're saying the overlap between their circles is too deep to ignore. Same parties, same powerful rooms, same risky business moves. It's like they were running parallel lives during hip-hop's most dangerous decade. And then there's Suge Knight. His history with Snoop is a roller coaster of loyalty, betrayal, and pure chaos. But when Suge, sitting behind bars, says he needs a real conversation with Snoop about what happened to Tupac, people listen. That's not just jail talk or attention-seeking. That's a red flag waving loud from inside a cell. Let's not forget, Suge was in the car when Shakur got hit. If anyone's been holding back information, it's him. So when he starts pointing fingers at Snoop, it says a lot. And then you've got Napoleon, still calling Snoop out years later. He claims Snoop didn't just drift away from Pac, he rewrote the story, gave interviews that downplayed Shakur's fire, even said he didn't like Hit 'Em Up, Pac's savage diss at Biggie and Bad Boy. And if that's true, then maybe Snoop's been cleaning his image by rewriting history all along. Napoleon said those weren't tributes, they were cover-ups. He claimed Snoop was rewriting history to tone down Tupac's raw edge and make himself look cleaner, calmer, more legendary. Then you've got Alan Hughes, the director behind Dear Mama, the Shakur and Afeni documentary, who said Snoop dipped his light so Shakur could shine. On the surface, that sounds like respect. But dig just a little deeper, and it starts to feel like something else. Like a man who stepped back, not out of love, but because he knew which way the spotlight was moving and wanted to make sure he'd still be glowing when it landed somewhere else. And guess what? It worked. Snoop walked out of death row smooth and landed right on his feet. He linked up with Master P's No Limit Records and reinvented himself from gangster rap's rebel to mainstream's favorite uncle. The Crip talk faded, the street heat cooled off, and suddenly Snoop was cooking with Martha Stewart and cracking jokes on prime time. Growth? Maybe. But it also smelled a lot like strategy. Because while Diddy's empire started rotting from the inside, scandals, lawsuits, and whispers of something darker, fans started looking back at the quiet ones. The ones who didn't make headlines, but were always there. In the rooms, at the parties, standing next to power but never catching the blame. The ones slick enough to keep their hands clean while still holding the keys to the engine room. So here's the real question. If Jaguar Wright was right, if Diddy really was running what she called a victim-making machine, then who else was part of it? Who stood by while the gears turned? Who smiled in public but stayed silent in private? Because if Snoop Dogg, the same man who fainted at Pac's bedside and flashed peace signs while the streets were on fire, was also reading pager messages before they went public and shaking hands with both sides during the chaos, then maybe he wasn't just surviving the storm. Maybe he was part of it. At this point, it's not just about loyalty anymore. It's about complicity. Because if Snoop really knew what was coming for Biggie too, then that pager stops looking like a random gadget from the 90s and starts looking like proof. A straight-up receipt from the shadows of hip-hop's darkest days. And now, with Suge Knight calling in from that prison phone, the story's getting louder. Suge didn't hint. He said it plain. He claimed Snoop's got a whole lot of explaining to do about what really went down with Tupac. And let's be real. When a man like Suge, sitting behind bars with nothing left to lose, starts naming names, you gotta listen. There's no reason for him to protect anyone anymore. That's why people are now rewatching everything. The plane ride, the hospital scene, that radio interview that started it all. Because those moments connect like puzzle pieces. The brotherhood turning into betrayal, the public tears covering private guilt, the devotion twisting into deception, and all of it keeps circling back to one haunting question. Who was really pulling Snoop's strings? It definitely wasn't Suge. By mid-2025, Sean Diddy Combs wasn't just fighting rumors anymore. He was convicted. 2 federal counts under the Mann Act for transporting individuals across state lines for illegal purposes. That trial ripped the curtain wide open, exposing an underground world the industry tried for years to hide. The courtroom was chaos. Testimonies that shook the room, footage that made people gasp. One of the most powerful voices in that courtroom, Cassie Ventura, Diddy's ex, who laid it all out. 10 years of control, threats, and manipulation happening behind closed doors, away from the flashing cameras. What the public didn't catch, and what insiders still whisper about, is who else was spotted at those wild parties. Because Jaguar Wright didn't stop at calling out Diddy. She said straight up, Snoop was in the room. She went into chilling detail about what went down, and she didn't flinch or hold back. According to her, Snoop wasn't some random guest who stumbled into chaos. He was part of the infrastructure. The same dark network she claims knew about Tupac's fate before it happened. The same circle that allegedly laughed, danced, and raised glasses while lives were being ruined and careers destroyed. And every time the court adds another guilty count, every time a new witness takes the stand, Jaguar's voice just gets louder. She's naming names, connecting threads, and one name she's never taken off her list is Snoop Dogg. But this story isn't just about what Snoop saw, it's about what he knew and when he knew it. Because now, the Department of Justice isn't just digging into Tupac's murder, they're studying patterns. The whispers around Biggie's final days, the pager messages that allegedly circled days before the Vegas shooting, and the quiet ties between Death Row and Bad Boy. Ties that were hidden under the mask of beef, but may have really been about survival. And now Snoop's name, once untouchable, once beyond question, is starting to appear next to Diddy's in more than one federal file. The biggest question haunting everyone right now isn't just what Snoop did back then, it's how much he knew. Because if that pager was real, it might not have been a random alert. It could have been part of a warning system shared by the insiders who already knew exactly how the board was set. This all points to one uncomfortable truth. Something changed between Snoop and Suge Knight long after their so-called beef hit the airwaves. Back in the early 2000s, they were taking shots at each other through diss tracks like Pimp Slapped and throwing shade every chance they got. But fast forward to 2018, and suddenly Snoop's out here praising Suge, calling him one of the best businessmen to ever come out of the West. That flip alone had people raising eyebrows. Then, in 2023, Snoop took it even further. On a podcast, he told a story that stunned everyone. He said he and Suge finally sat down, just the two of them, no cameras, no crew, no security, in a quiet Vegas hotel room. And what he said next hit deep. "I told Suge I loved him. I said, I could have saved you. That's not rap bravado. That's a man rewriting a piece of history we all thought was sealed shut." But here's the real twist nobody saw coming. When Suge Knight launched his own podcast Collect Call, people expected wild stories, flexes, maybe even revenge talk. But instead, Suge turned the heat right back on Snoop. And not just for betrayal. He didn't say Snoop knew what happened to Tupac. He said Snoop did something after the shooting that changed everything. His words were vague, but his tone? Ice cold. Suge warned, if it's true what they say, face to face, there's gonna be a lot of explaining to do. Coming from a man who was in the car when Pac got hit, that's not gossip. That's a loaded statement waiting for a courtroom mic. And it doesn't stop there. Because the DOJ's renewed focus on hip-hop's unsolved tragedies didn't just appear out of nostalgia or fan obsession, it came from evidence. Quiet evidence buried for years, now rising again in places nobody expected, and names nobody thought would ever be questioned. Everything changed after Diddy's 2025 conviction. It cracked open the illusion that anything in this industry stays buried. The so-called code of silence that once protected the powerful suddenly looked fragile. The Mann Act charges proved something terrifying. The feds are willing to dig through decades of dirt, pulling from history to solve crimes still unfolding today. We're not just talking scandalous behavior here. The whispers go deeper, to conversations, deals, and blackmail material traded like social currency among the elite. If tapes exist, if guest lists, video logs, or hidden recordings were kept, then the fallout could reach far beyond gossip blogs. It could shake entire investigations. Sources close to the case have already hinted that what the feds pulled in 2025 doesn't just matter for Diddy's trial. It could tie into cold cases reaching back 30 years. And that's when all roads lead back to the name that never left hip-hop's shadow, Tupac Shakur. Because if Diddy's empire was being watched, if his parties were tracked, and if the downfall unlocked hidden files, then one-pager message might be the missing link that unravels it all. The one sent, or seen, by Snoop Dogg. No one's ever revealed the exact words, no one's shown the message itself, but too many insiders keep circling that same moment in time. Like they know that message holds the truth. Nobody wants to say out loud. Too many people still remember those days before the shooting, and if that pager buzzed before the bullets flew, that means someone sent it. Someone out there still holds the key. And if the feds are finally asking why now and why Shakur, then this isn't just a theory anymore. It's a trail. A trail someone's desperate to cover up. So what did Snoop really do after Tupac was gone? Insiders claim he didn't just mourn, he moved. Dropped The Dogfather, walked away from Death Row, and linked up with Master P's No Limit empire like he'd planned it all along. It wasn't just a clean break, it was too clean. Like a man who saw the collapse coming and built his exit months ahead of time. By the time Suge was locked up, Snoop had transformed, smiling on TV, baking with Martha Stewart, turning his image into a brand. It looked like growth, but to some it looked like a man who knew the storm before it hit. Then came the contradictions. Interviews where Snoop flipped his story about Tupac. One minute they were brothers, the next he claimed Pac didn't even like him. He said he hated Hit 'em Up, that he wanted peace with Biggie and Puffy. Just days after Pac and Suge were raging over that exact attitude, Napoleon from the Outlaws said it straight. Snoop wasn't just changing the story, he was rewriting the whole legacy. And when you line it up with Jaguar Wright's claim that Snoop was under Diddy's influence for decades, every move starts to look staged. The radio talk, the blade on the plane, the tears at the hospital, they all start to feel like performance, not pain. Because if both Shakur and Biggie were gone, who really won? Who walked away untouched? Still on stage today, smiling, selling nostalgia while the rest are gone, locked up or silenced. Suge says Snoop's got explaining to do. Jaguar says he was in the room. The feds say the patterns match, and we're left staring at that pager. The message that may have come before Tupac's pulse faded, before Biggie's window shattered, before the truth got buried under platinum plaques. So now, it's your turn. What do you think? Was Snoop Dogg a survivor caught in the crossfire, or the quiet architect behind it all? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, share, and subscribe, and trust, this story's far from over. See you in the next one.